Hi, my name is Josh Madoff, and this is the first episode in a series of conversations I'm calling Piano Talk. Today I'm going to share a conversation I had with my longtime friend and student, Dotan Negrin. If you haven't already heard of Dotan, he has a really cool YouTube channel called Piano Around, where he traveled the world with a piano and played in some of the most incredible places. He's a really inspiring dude, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did.
What is talent? People say, he's got talent, she's got talent, I wish I could play like that. But what is talent? Where does it come from?
First, I want to know what you think. What do you think talent means, Dotan?
To me, talent means hard work. It means dedication. It reminds me of the 10,000 hour rule, which says that you have to work or you have to practice at least 10,000 hours before you are actually really good at something or an expert, considered to be an expert in something. And so I think talent is all that effort that you put into becoming talented. And that's why they look at people with talent and they're like, oh, he's so talented. But really, he spent, years and years of work to get to that level, right?
That's a beautiful way of looking at it. I wish more people actually saw that. And I'd like to try to break down where does talent come from and just how practiced and learned these skills all are. Unfortunately, most people, when they say talent, they just assume like somebody's got magic. They're just born with some kind of magical powers that make them amazing at piano or gymnastics or whatever else it is.
Right, because they do it with such ease that people are like, wow, how amazing he is.
Exactly. And I think the idea of talent, at least the way most people view it, is actually pretty harmful, and it's not true. It's not accurate. Nobody's born great at anything. Like if you have amazing pitch or rhythm or virtuosity on an instrument, you learned it. Some people just don't notice when the learning started, and it gives off this illusion that they have an innate ability.
Right. Interesting that you bring that up, that most people don't notice where the learning began, because you look at kids that started playing piano or started playing music at an early age and how they can easily retain information and learn things, just like learning a language or learning English.
A child virtuoso is abnormal for one reason and one reason only. Because they put in probably not 10,000 hours. If you look at, most virtuosos, they're very good, but you see them on their way to 10,000 hours. But they might be 2,000 to 3,000 hours in by the time you see this 7-year-old play, who was practicing 2 to 5 hours a day from age 3. The abnormal thing is that they were doing the work at that age. It's not that they're young and they're great. It's that all the stars have to align for you to be able to do that. You have to be a kid who can sit still. You have to have the opportunity. You have to have an instrument. You have to have parents who either encourage you or, maybe forced you. But the phenomenon isn't this amazing kid born with amazing skills. The phenomenon is that they were able to fit that much work at such a young age. But I want to go back even further. Because when people talk about talent, they might think somebody has a really good ear for pitch. So let's talk about pitch first. So if you see a second grader who can sing beautifully, maybe harmonize with other people, sings perfectly in tune, is that innate, natural, God-given power?
I wonder, can a person have such good, perfect pitch without all that work? Is that even possible?
The work happens when no one's looking, including the kid. So there's two ways in which someone very young can have great pitch. The first way is if a baby becomes fascinated, infatuated with matching pitches with their voice, they're going to have great pitch. So if a child naturally hears the humming of an air conditioner or a refrigerator or a sound someone makes and they just want to just match that pitch perfectly, they're doing their work ahead of time. Now, by the time they're 3 or 4, you see this kid who can hit notes beautifully.
Interesting, yeah.
You didn't pay attention to the fact that they were constantly trying to match pitch. It's thousands and thousands of hours.
They're developing their ear constantly, on a daily basis. It's funny. I just thought of. You ever hear of when mothers are pregnant and they play Beethoven or Mozart or any kind of soft, soothing music while the baby's in the womb? You think that might have something to do with it?
It's possible. Well, and that actually brings up the other way that most people, I'd say, learn to sing really well is if you grow up in a family who sings in tune, you sing in tune.
Right.
This is something I come across very, very often, and it drives me nuts. Because most people say, I can't hear pitch, I'm tone deaf. 99.99999% of the time, no, you're not. You might think you are, but if you can hear the difference between a really high note and a really low note, if you can hear some lady singing soprano and breaking glasses and, Barry White, and you can tell one's lower than the other's higher, then you're not tone deaf. And you can take that ability, even if you can only hear really extreme distances of pitch, and you can train that and make that distance smaller and smaller and smaller until you can match pitches. And the reason I know this is because dozens of times I've trained people who couldn't hit a note to save their life, to sing beautifully in tune. It's an acquired skill. And whether or not you know it and you see the kid who did the work by some magical accident because they happen to be fascinated with pitch, or they grow up in a family that sings beautifully, you missed the work, but the work happened. They acquired that skill. I have literally never met somebody who was truly tone deaf, and I'm sure they exist, but they're definitely outliers. It's an anomaly.
And look, we've all been there in terms of just defeating ourselves before we even try something. I think everybody's had that experience where they come up with an excuse as to why they can't do something. And I think that's what's actually been great with working with you, because you're kind of like motivating me every time we meet, every time we do a lesson. It's great to have someone that kind of like motivate you and push you to keep going when you feel like, oh man, I can't do this.
Well, being on the other end of it, so I had to learn pitch because I didn't have good ears. I didn't have great rhythm. If I had any innate skill, it might have been like a aptitude for coordination and dexterity, but that's about it. I had to learn all of these things the hard way, and it took me a long time, and I did them as an adult. So I know that they can be learned. The same thing applies to rhythm. You see a kid, you might see a 9-year-old kid who plays in church and just crushes and has this amazing pocket. Or you might even just see, a 6 or 7-year-old kid who just happens to tap out rhythms really beautifully and just maybe even can dance already at that age. It comes from the same place, though. It's no different than pitch. That's a kid who was trying to match rhythm at a very, very young age.
But what is that? So the kid's trying to match rhythm, but like, where is that coming from? Where this child at 1, 2, 3 years old is actually doing this in their mind, or they're actually doing it in real life? Is is that something that they're born with? Could it be in the culture? Is it part of hundreds and thousands of years of that habit of doing those things?
Now that's interesting, because I personally believe that when people are learning rhythm, what you're doing is removing all of the barriers to hearing the rhythm in you. And it sounds so new agey and corny, but it's true. Yeah. If you really listen, you know where the beat is. And sometimes learning to listen takes a long time. It's similar to meditating, where it takes a long time to find even moments where you aren't lost in thought perpetually. I think it takes time for some people to learn at first, just in these little pockets of where you feel that rhythm and you know that it's there. But like anything else, it can be trained. Right. And I know, because I've taught a lot of people that didn't have good rhythm, and all of my students play with a metronome and learn excellent rhythm. And I'm still learning new things about rhythm 20 plus years into my career as a music student. I'm still learning new things every day, but it can be learned. However, some people, if you take a kid who's 3 years old, this is what they do in gospel churches. You take a really young kid, you put them on a drum set, and it's really adorable because sometimes it's a full-size drum set, and you just put them with a band of amazing musicians, just a bunch of adult, just killer musicians. Yeah. And he just kind of smashes and plays and figures it out. By the time the kid's 5, though, he's a killer. Yeah. You just soak it up. It's the Montessori music method. But you will see it similar to pitch. You'll see some kids who just like to repeat rhythm and tap things out. And they hear the train go, and they want to repeat that rhythm. That's funny. But for whatever reason it's there, you don't get to pick that. You don't get to pick what you're interested in when you're 1.
It's true, yeah. You're just like a sponge soaking everything up.
Yeah, and you probably have some things you're born with that you're just driven to do some things and not to do others, It's just the way it is. But the good news is it doesn't matter. because anybody can learn that. I've never met anybody who couldn't learn rhythm. And for some people, it's really bad at first. Like it's just clapping to a really simple drum beat is impossible. So we start there. You start simple. Okay, you're just going to clap once every 4 measures. Can you figure out where the crash is, Okay, we can do that now. Cool. Let's try to clap once every measure. And you can bring it down until you can clap on every beat. And then, as you and I both know, there's some of the stuff we're both working on, like there's levels here. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper.
It's endless. It's just like endless layers of building and building and building. And it's like, it never ends. It just never ends.
But that's the beauty of it. We're all in the same boat. So even the really talented kids or talented kids who are, born with a predisposition or this really amazing experiences at a young age, they still can grow and learn and get better and better.
I think the key ingredient, though, to that is to really learning to enjoy the process of learning, because it can get frustrating. It can be hard at times, and I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges for everybody, because it's easy to get impatient and frustrated and give up. But to learn to enjoy that process of learning these things is, I think it's a huge thing to learn.
Well, it's one of the advantages of learning something young. You might not have the patience in some ways of an adult, but you don't have the expectations of an adult either.
Boom, that's huge. Wow.
They don't mind failing because everything is a failure.
Yeah.
From the age of 0 to 3, you have to learn to literally make sound from your mouth. You have to learn to lift your body off the ground before you can even learn to crawl, before you learn to stand, before you learn to walk. You have to learn what everything in the entire world is. You know nothing.
Yeah.
So everything is just constant failure. Not knowing is just normal for a very young child.
And that's so interesting, because with a 1-year-old, you're not going to hit the child if he does something wrong. There has to be this positive reinforcement, and without that, you're learning this negative reaction to it. And I feel like what you just said about failure, the expectations that we have as adults, we've learned that habit that failure is bad. And I think that is probably one of the biggest problems that we have as adults when it comes to learning anything or learning an instrument. It's so easy to give up because of that fear of failure.
Mistakes, which point out your failures, are the only way to learn.
Yeah.
Kids know that, adults forget it. Let's talk about technique, because that's another one. You see somebody's hands flying across an instrument, and most people just assume there's some magic there. They must have a physical gift. But everything can be broken down. And to talk about what we mentioned before, but about mistakes, you don't get to choose what's going to be hard for you. Nobody does. Just like you don't get to choose what's going to be easy for you. And also, you can't predict what those things are going to be, and they're going to surprise you. But if you have a technical challenge, that's what you're supposed to work on. The difference between students who get really technically proficient at their instrument and the ones who don't is very simple. The ones who get great are the ones who focus on what they're not good at. And the ones who don't are the ones who avoid doing the things that they're not good at. You don't get to pick your challenges. So when it comes to technique, if you can just become a student who focuses on what you're not good at. If you have a weak left hand, you should play everything twice with your left hand for everything you play with your right hand once. And it will catch up, I promise you.
Yeah.
If you're having issues with certain types of technique, you slow it down and you spend most of your practice on that. If you have trouble with arpeggios, maybe double down, more arpeggios than scales. If you have trouble reading, practice reading. But as long as you focus on what you're not good at, you will get very good.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's easy to build the habit of just sitting at the piano and noodling, throwing in some noodles and throwing in some noodles. I think it's really easy to just sit at the piano and get distracted in terms of just noodling around and improvising and playing whatever comes to your heart. But to really sit down and figure out a strategy or like a method, a routine of working on those challenges is a whole other thing. And I think that's the only way to get, I agree, I think it's the only way to get better faster.
Well, the thing is, not everyone has access to a teacher. And not everybody has access to good musicians to play with or to learn from. But even practicing is a skill that you will get better at if you focus on what you're not good at. If you look at your practice from the perspective of how can I do this better? In what ways am I lacking in my practice? Where's the fat? How do I trim the fat? You'll figure it out eventually. Every problem has a solution. Every obstacle, like I said, you don't get to choose them, but every single one can be overcome. And I know this from experience because I've never had a student. I mean, never at this point, at least 16, 17 years of teaching, never had a student who couldn't learn something we tried to learn. And sometimes it's more difficult, but that's the beauty of it. The more challenging something is for you to learn, the more you gain as a musician from learning it.
Right.
Like if you want to get your superpowers, that's where you find them, from the things that challenge you the most.
Right, and you can't skip steps either. It's so easy to, especially in the beginning, to be like, oh, I want to play. This is actually what I did. I skipped a bunch of steps, especially in the beginning, and I wanted to learn the maple leaf rag. And what ended up happening, I was doing these like long strides with octaves on my left hand, and I actually started hurting myself because I didn't actually have the proper technique.
I did the same thing myself. Instead of learning to work my way through all like these simple 3-note chords, which you can do pretty much everything with, I skipped to these, giant polychords and all these complicated things. I mean, I could learn to make my hand do that. I didn't know what I was doing. I could practice them in every key, but I didn't really have access to that information. And I skipped all these steps, and I've had to go back and just do the basics. And now it's kind of funny because I'm able to do really complicated things on the piano based on the basics. It doesn't come from something I was reaching for.
You got to learn the alphabet before you can put the words together. And you got to learn the words before you can make sentences.
Yeah, I mean, you can teach a 3-year-old to say, 5-syllable words, but it's not going to help them learn to have a conversation. Talking about practice as a skill makes me think of another kind of talent that people always assign to people. You say, I could never be that focused on something. Focus is a muscle that you exercise, and it's specific to each task. I'm sure that every single person who's going to hear this has some kind of very intense focus in their life, whether you recognize it or not. It might be on your kids, it might be on your friends, it might be on some hobby that you're really into. It might be when you go to see music or some show, you're zoned in. And you've learned over time to really focus for a long time on that activity. Piano's no different, or any instrument for that matter. But everybody can learn to focus in small intervals, and you can grow those intervals out. And that's a really important idea.
Yeah.
This idea of practicing for 5 minutes, because I know that I can focus for just 5 minutes. I can grow that to 10-minute practice, to 15-minute practice. If I can practice for just 5 minutes every single day, I can build on that. And you will get very good. But if you burn out and just force yourself to try to focus and you can't for 30 minutes, and then you get frustrated and you stop for a week, you're not going to get anywhere that way.
Right, it's the consistency. It's the consistency of building one baby step at a time, one baby step. It's such a beautiful metaphor for everything, for life, for learning anything,
You can do so much in small intervals. Focused practice is unbelievably productive, and unfocused practice is sometimes worse than not practicing at all.
I mean, I've found that for myself that if I stop for a little while, that I lose momentum, and it's that momentum that is gonna, it'll compound on itself in terms of your energy and your momentum moving forward.
And I think the same thing goes for discipline. I mean, it's the exact same thing. Discipline is a muscle that needs to be exercised. Asking somebody to practice for 5 minutes, 6 days a week, that's not a big ask. And make sure, obviously, that practice is calm and patient and focused. But if you can do that, you can do 10 minutes a day, and then you can do 15. And before you know it, you're playing things you would have never dreamed of just a month or two later.
Yeah.
I think one of the trickiest types of talent that people assume other people have, they don't necessarily even use the word talent, but it's about attitude. If somebody has a wonderful attitude, the assumption is just that they're just lucky. They're just one of those happy people. But this is something that is learned, and this is something that is practiced, just like any other skill. Everybody knows it, because if you surround yourself by extremely negative things and negative people, you're going to feel extremely negative. And it sounds really simple, and also, like some of the other things we said today, new agey, but it's true. If you surround yourself by positive people and positive things, you will start to think positively. Going back to the 5-minute idea. If you decide, no matter how down you are, like say you've made a commitment, I want to try to learn piano. You decide, okay, for 5 minutes today, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to be focused, and I'm going to be extremely positive for 5 minutes. And you can start your cursing and all of your, negative thoughts after that. But you're going to do 5 positive minutes, and then you stop. And the next day you do 5 positive minutes, and the next day you do 5 positive minutes. And then after a few weeks, maybe you can do 10.
I'm actually doing this right now with, I got my morning routine, and I literally have a whiteboard right there where I mark out an X for every day of the week. I have all my tasks, like, piano, and, I do a little bit of social media every day. So I just kind of blocked out exercise. I do deep breathing, and I put an X, I put a little number, 5, 10 minutes. How many minutes did I do? And I'm quantifying it all right now, which is cool.
It's a really powerful tool. Measuring is very, very helpful. I mean, at first maybe you don't need to if you're just picking one task, and you're starting very small. But yeah, eventually you're going to need more sophisticated tools, but you'll learn that. That's another thing. That's like people who have organized practice tend to get better faster. That's a skill you acquire over time.
Mm-hmm. I've learned that the hard way. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think both of us have.
It's so easy. Honestly, I think my biggest problem is wanting to just, I'm just going to improvise. I'm just going to play from the heart. But what I ended up realizing is I start to play the same things. Occasionally, I make a mistake, which would lead me to a new idea. But I realized how it's kind of like an easy way to fall back and not do the things that are more challenging.
Well, and when you add that discipline practice to the beginning of your practice, before you start, improvising and having fun, over time you develop enough skills that you can enjoy your improvisations and your fun time even more.
Yeah.
The more fluent you are on piano, the more enjoyable it is to play, not just because you can play more complicated or more interesting or better sounding things, but because it's so natural after you put in enough work that you can actually sit back as a passenger and enjoy your own playing.
And the music just kind of creates itself, right? It just kind of flows out of you, and just this, you're not thinking anymore too hard about it. It just kind of flows out of you with ease.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you do the hard work.
Yeah.
Good work is never lost. That's another thing that's really important. If you put in these, hundreds or thousands of hours, and then you took a break, when you come back, you're going to have to shake the rust off a little bit. You're going to have to intelligently, hopefully, strategically warm yourself back up into a routine. And you can get there if you follow the path of small, focused, good, positive attitude intervals, productive, tiny intervals, and build on that. You'll get back there. But you didn't lose the work. You didn't lose the skills. The muscle memory is still there.
Yeah, definitely. It's like riding a bike, right?
Exactly. Everything is like riding a bike, apparently. So I think just the last assumption, we're talking about assumptions about talent, but I think the last assumption that drives me the most nuts is when people assume that they can't overcome something. They assume that they can't learn something. I have been working with people with special needs for the last 20 years. And I don't remember exactly when this happened, but at some point, I just decided to assume that they can learn everything. It doesn't matter what their disability is, doesn't matter how many cards are stacked against them. I just assumed there is a way. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily know it yet. I most of the time didn't, but I assumed that they could learn it. And 100% of the time they were able to learn. Now this is a passion of mine, so I really actually seek out these students who've had other piano teachers in the past or drum teachers, whatever they're learning, and they basically just stagnated. The teacher, you could tell, didn't think they could learn, didn't think they could read very well. Mm-hmm. They might have been playing for years and they got nowhere. And I just assume you're going to learn all your major skills. I just assume you can. And we're going to have fun, and I'll be supportive, and we'll take our time, and we might spend 3 weeks on one scale, but the next scale might only take 2 weeks.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite stories. I have a student Well, they actually moved away, so he's not a student anymore. But I had a student who's nonverbal, who's autistic, 5 years old. First lesson, he cried the entire lesson. I couldn't get him to do anything.
Wow.
30 minutes of crying. Just 30 minutes of tears. Okay. I was calm. I was patient. I said, I'll be back next week, and we'll try again. I came back the next lesson, maybe 20 minutes of tears, and I got him to play a couple notes. Maybe even a smile, but 20 minutes out of 30 minutes of tears, not very encouraging, right?
Yeah.
Next lesson, 2 to 5 minutes of crying. And we had a lesson. He learned part of a C major scale, but very choppy. It was very difficult to get him to play the same note over and over and over again. Over the course of the next year, this amazing kid learned every single major and minor scale,
Wow.
playing songs, 4 notes at a time. He can play and sing. Lessons were a joy. We laugh hysterically.
Wow.
It's incremental gains, but this doesn't just apply to people with obvious struggles, people with special needs, people with disabilities. This is for all of us. Whatever it is you think you can't do, just assume that you can.
Yeah.
Just do it as a favor to me, anyone
huge.
who's listening to this.
That's huge.
Assume
man.
that you can do it, and I promise you, if you maintain that assumption, the solutions will follow. I never know. Now after teaching for so long, I do have a lot of solutions that I try to apply to other people, but I'm wrong a lot. But whatever that thing that happened to me in my brain at some point when I just said, I'm just decided I'm going to assume that they can learn everything. After that point, I've never failed to come up with a solution. And I'm not special. Anybody can do that. Especially, you should be doing it for yourself. You need to be the best, most supportive, most encouraging, most creative music teacher for yourself. Just assume you can do that too.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think that's enormous. It's an enormous thing in life. It's enormous to, because again, I think everybody's experiences where they felt like they couldn't do something. Like you said, if you just believe that you can do anything. It's not going to be easy, obviously. It's still going to be a struggle. You might have to struggle throughout the process, but if you just keep going, you'll get there.
Yeah, and like discipline, like focus, like pitch, like technique, it's a skill.
It's just practice.
Yeah. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as we did. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on what is talent, what does it mean, where does it come from, so please leave a comment below. And of course, if you have any questions for me or Dotan, please leave that in a comment as well, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. And don't forget to like and subscribe and ding that bell so you get notified about the next video.